Giles Hutchins, thank you for being with us today. You are definitely a pioneer at the forefront of the leadership consciousness. You wrote, among others, Nature of Business, Regenerative Leadership, and previously you were head of transformation practice for KPMG, global director and head of sustainability for Atos. Giles, tell me, is there one moment that put you on the path of regenerative leadership?
So there was the first moment really that triggered me was very early on when I was about 7 years old. I had quite a profound out-of-body experience that lasted for just over an hour, where I really sensed the deep interconnectedness of life. It was an experience I had in nature, and I felt something quite deep and profound that has stayed with me since. And then when I was 15, I had another quite interesting experience when a teacher showed us some videos of animals being tested on live in factories and laboratories and being skinned alive in abattoirs. And that sent me down a pathway which has led to me exploring why we have come to feel we're disconnected from nature, and how do we reconnect ourselves back into nature.
Oh, and this is important.
We aren't, as a humanity, we aren't going to be able to deal with the plethora of challenges that we face today without a shift in consciousness. And this shift in consciousness is actually quite simple. It's not easy, but it is simple. And it's a return to remembering that we are part of nature, and that naturally we are able to tune in and work with the grain of nature rather than against it. Until we allow our organizations and our social systems to work the way nature works, we are still lost. And therefore that requirement, that shift in awareness and consciousness, is primary to any shift in the world and in our civilization going forward.
Oh, this shift in awareness and consciousness, is this what regenerative leadership is about?
So regenerative is really about working the way nature works, finding ourselves back in flow with life. Regenerative leadership is about allowing ourselves as leaders, as employees, as change agents in our organizations and social systems, to go on a journey of reconnecting back into the rapture of reality. And that itself involves a threshold crossing, a shift in consciousness, to let go of old ways that perhaps served us in the past, and to embrace a deeper way of operating, which requires us to connect more deeply into our own psyche, into our heart as well as our heads, and to connect more deeply with others around us and to the world, to nature. For the organization, a fundamental part of that is recognizing the organization as a living system that is full of systemic relationships, and that we can tune in to that living system. We can sense the living system's essence and evolutionary purpose, and work with it to help it become more life-affirming, more in tune with how life really works on Earth.
According to you, what are the most important living principles?
I feel the most important principles for us to understand when looking at regenerative business is recognizing the organization as a living system and seeing it as a developmental, emergent, and evolutionary system. So that's DEE, I call it, D for short. So developmental is an organization that is continuously learning, adapting, and seeking feedback and exploring and allowing each person to learn and grow in their own way, yet within the coherence of a system. And emergent is recognizing that life isn't linear, and that actually it's not full of simple cause-effect relationships, that there's all sorts of interconnected, systemic and synchronistic activities that are going on, and that we can allow ourselves to become more emergent and work with the emergence of the living system by taking an organizational acupuncture approach, by sensing how the system works and how the threads and the nodes and the acupuncture points in the system are working. And evolutionary is about recognizing that the living system, the organization, as well as ourselves, have an innate evolutionary potential. that we're constantly seeking to adapt and evolve and change in an ever adaptive landscape. And so by spending time sensing in and listening to the essence of the organization, what's its true reason for being, and also sensing how it's adapting and how it can evolve to the ever-changing landscape. And so a balance of that developmental, that emergence, and that evolutionary potential allows us to create a living system that is future fit and life affirming.
How can we convince people that think that this approach is not a scientific approach?
Well, we're going through quite a profound worldview shift. We're still dominated by a 400-year-old operating model, even though we pride ourselves on being innovative and cutting edge. And that 400-year-old operating model I call mechanistic materialism, that has a certain view about how nature works, how life works, and how organizations work. It's mechanistic and it's materialistic and it's reductive. It can be broken down into parts and then measured, monitored, controlled, and reduced. Now, that is a useful tool that we have, but it's not actually how life works. So it's a useful tool for managing and controlling that we can use and apply. But actually, what we're now recognizing, and it's profound scientists have recognized this from the early 20th century, Einstein, Schrödinger, Bohr, Bohm, many scientists recognize that actually there is entanglement, non-locality innate within life. And then complexity theorists and scientists like Bateson, Progene, Fritjof-Capra, these are award-winning, some of the Nobel laureate scientists have explored how complex systems actually behave and how life behaves. So this is rooted in science. It's just rooted in a more up-to-date science than the 400-year-old operating system, which is now out of date.
We noticed that a lot of your books ended with this idea of love. Is there a reason for that?
Well, I ended up finishing all of my books so far anyway on love or referring to love, and especially in regenerative leadership, exploring myself and Laura how the whole logic of life really is one of love. And the reason for that is the experiences I've had through my life when I felt a deep sense of connection to nature, to life, have been ones of open-hearted love. And the same as when I've felt deep love for other human beings, I've felt that sense of deep connection to life. And so in a funny kind of way, as human beings are searching for love, and yet it's all here. It's always here. All we need to do is learn to reconnect, and we are in love.
Thank you. Could you give us a fact or maybe a figure that could help us memorize your main idea?
Life is ever changing all the time, and life is full of tensions of change, and life is interconnected and relational. By just being aware of how life is, it helps us let go of some of the challenges that we get caught up in, some of the mental chatter, and allow us to connect more deeply to the inner nature of how life really works.
So, according to you, what are the root causes of the current vision that we have today? And maybe how could we overcome that?
Yes, the root problem that we're experiencing today is a sense of disconnection. So we are experiencing a disintegration of social systems throughout the world and structures. But what underpins that is a disintegration of our own psyche. We have become impoverished in our own psychic being. And that's because we have come to believe an illusion of separateness, that we are actually separate from our own deeper nature, from each other, and from the world around us. And we've got too caught up in that mechanistic mindset. And so allowing ourselves to fall back into a sense of deeper connection with our own selves and with life around us is critical. It's the root problem. And I found that taking people into nature and having immersions in nature is a powerful way to enable that reconnection. There are many other tools as well. And it's not just a one-off shift, and we can have epiphanies and we can have experiences where we sense that connectedness. I'm sure we all have, perhaps in a state of flow, whilst doing something we love and so forth. But it's actually how do we bring that more regularly into our day-to-day way of living? And that involves a threshold crossing, what adult developmental psychology calls a shift in our meaning making, which studies show can happen as we develop and go through certain practices to shift our awareness so that we understand the interconnectedness of how life really works. What we're running up against in this shift towards a regenerative way of being is our own inured patterns of behavior, our own habits. And sometimes we can project it onto capitalism, onto institutions, onto certain levels of behavior or an elite. And yet we need to empathize with the situation we're currently in and see it in our own selves first, to then be able to start transmuting, start moving beyond that reductive, disconnected way of seeing. And that first starts with our own selves. Then we can start to empathize with how systems have managed and manifested the way they have done, and we can start unpicking them and start helping heal them with love rather than judgment.
Thank you. Would you have a piece of advice for our pioneers?
So this regenerative journey is really about helping us become more aware of how life really is and aware of our own psyche. And so my invitation to you is to not get too caught up in all the facts and figures and tools and techniques and see it as something out there. For sure, there's plenty you can read and learn and explore and practice, and that's a very vital part of it. But first and foremost, remind yourself to still yourself. Remind yourself to connect. Remind yourself to find your own practice that works for you, that enables you to feel that inner stillness, that inner sense of connectedness each and every day.
Thanks, Giles. Last questions. If you were a plant, which one would it be and why?
I would pick the lichen, and I pick the lichen because actually it's a combination of three different kingdoms, where we call them kingdoms, or three different branches of life: the fungi, bacteria, and the algae, all working together. And so it's a symbiosis, it's a rich conglomeration, just as we are. Our bodies are full of different cells and bacteria and forms of life. But the lichen is the first great recycler. It comes out of the sea when there's a big wipeout on Earth, and it breaks down indigestible matter, whether it's rocks, whether it's barks on trees, and other plants then and other microbes start to live on what the lichen breaks down. So it's the beginnings, it's the beginning of a new dawn.
Thank you, Giles. Love, connection, awareness, consciousness, this is really the path we need to follow. So thank you for this very, very meaningful conversation.